What's up everybody? Good evening. Monday evening as ever, here we are live today, back at home after my little trip to Germany last week. So thank you very much for those who tuned in last week. I was amazed to see that it all worked, that the hotel Wi-Fi worked. I think we went by without any technical hitches for maybe the first time ever. So thanks for your patience, thanks for coming back. Let's say hello to a few of you, because even 5 hours before we went live today, we were engaged in chat right here on the channel. So massive big up to those of you who were there right back in this morning, or around lunchtime I think it was, when we started this chat process. So thank you very much. It's been active all day. I've been dipping in and out answering questions, so thanks for all of those. Hello from America, says Exholic. Dusky Cheshire says Tramp's Vest. Good afternoon from Utah, Russ Burton. A lot of familiar names coming back, which is great to see. Greetings from Sully, California, David Paycheck. The mic's working nice, yes. I think I've got that sorted now. South Africa, Sean Lombard. Southend-on-Sea, Jazz Woodall. Rotterdam, Brian Haas. Hello, Mr. Priestley says Aaron. Hello from California, Daniel Begg. Thank you guys from all over the world for tuning in. I massively appreciate it as ever. We've got Thomas Henson from York, Barry in South Wales, checking in from Hong Kong at 4 a.m. in the morning. Big respect to Red Hen 88, 4 a.m. Man, could you not sleep? Or were you literally getting up early or staying up late to watch this? Either way, really appreciate it. Mario Positano from Toronto in Canada, and Paul Tor from Spain, Peter Thorne in Wales, and I could go on and on. We've got people from India, Grimsby, Germany, Philadelphia, Dubai, New Zealand as well, goodness me, San Francisco, amazing. I could do that all night, but I won't. We are going to start off this evening by talking about the size of modern F1 cars, as you'll have seen from the title and has been already discussed throughout the chat already. We'll get into that in a moment. I do want to say that this time next week, when we do the live Ask Elvis, I've got a bit of an idea, and I haven't thought this through at all, but I've got an idea that I might get one of you to come on and kind of co-host with me. So I've got to work out how we do that. Technically, I know how we did it, how we can do it, because it worked with Mike Brewer, of course, the other week. So we can definitely make that happen. I've just got to find a way of choosing somebody. I'll work that out, and keep an eye on my Instagram and Twitter, and I will announce how I'm going to do that and how I work it out. If somebody wants to come and join, you just need to have access to Zoom and obviously a camera and mic on your laptop or whatever, and we can make that happen. So I might end up with a co-host next week, and it could be one of you. So keep an eye on my socials for that one. I will let you know. Let's start off the Q&A then, because we're going to start, as I said. The title of the video came from this question from Lauren Vemmel, who says, do you believe that less wide F1 cars could improve overtaking? It could be helpful, especially on older F1 tracks like Monza and Spa, etc. So in very basic terms, could narrower cars help overtaking? And I think I responded on, this was on YouTube, this question came, I think I immediately responded saying, well, it can't hurt. And the truth is, narrower cars take up less space on the racetrack, potentially give us more room at some circuits to physically get cars by. But of course it goes way deeper than that. It's much more complicated than just that. And you'll have seen, I'll bring it back up here, this image that I used as the, oh it wasn't that one, but that's a good image, showing you the evolution of Formula One cars over the years, and just look how the size grows. Now, this is an image that I've taken from just off Twitter. I can't verify it, so I can't verify its accuracy. I'm taking whoever created this, his word for it. It looks reasonably accurate and certainly gives a good enough picture to show just what's happened over the last few years. They've got visibly longer and visibly wider. And if we think about that, I'll bring that back in a moment, but just think about that. A single car takes up much more space on the racetrack. So if you put 2 or 3 of them next to each other, you've run out of road very quickly. So on that level, it makes it much harder to overtake. The other big impact and the other big problem with big, wide cars is, of course, the aerodynamic one, is the wake that comes off the back of those cars being a great, much bigger turbulent wake, particularly coming off the really wide stance of the tyres that we've had in recent years. Now that big wide wake, messy wake coming off the back is what really hurts the cars coming through the corners and any of the twisty bits of the circuit where they lose downforce. The trailing car loses so much downforce that it then becomes really hard to stay close enough when you get onto the straight to affect an overtake. So as well as the physical width of the cars on the racetrack, the aerodynamic effect of a big wide car is perhaps even more detrimental than the physical size on the racetrack. So then the question comes, you know, could we make them narrower or could we make them shorter? And I know the question was about width, but let's bring into that the overall length and maybe even the weight. I mean, these things are enormous, they are heavy, much more so than when we first started out in Formula One. I mean, just look at that again. You can say that's probably, what, a third longer again than the cars at the beginning of that list. On the right-hand side, the cars on the left, the modern cars, probably a third longer than they started. And again, I'm not sure the exact widths. Obviously, they're 2 meters wide now. I'm not sure what they were back then. I should have done that research. That was foolish of me. But they are considerably wider as well. So could we make them shorter? Could we make them narrower? Could we make them lighter? And the answer to all three of those is probably yes, certainly two of them. We could make them shorter, we could definitely make them narrower, because all we need to do is make a change to the regulations and the box that the teams have to design within becomes smaller and narrower, and they will make it work. Could it be lighter? Yes, we could make cars lighter, but obviously the modern technology on board a Formula One car, particularly with the hybrid side of things, does add a considerable amount of weight. And as we move forward and start to standardise more components, we will start to get heavier cars in that respect, because teams are not pushing the development of lighter, ever lighter materials to bring the weight of those cars down. So that's that one, but let's focus on length and width. So yes, we could do it. And so let's ask why we don't do it, or why we haven't done it. And it's mostly because the longer car and the wider car effectively gives more aerodynamic surface for the car to generate downforce. And so the teams are reluctant to go smaller because they lose downforce or downforce capability. And F1, if you remember, over the last few years has had a big push to get faster and faster and faster Formula One cars. They had a big desire to have the fastest cars ever. And to do that, we needed to create a huge amount of downforce, and that's where these huge, big, wide and long cars can fit that objective. If we say the most important thing actually isn't having cars that do the fastest lap times in F1 history, the most important thing is have great racing with lots of overtaking, then that's a philosophy change from F1's perspective, but absolutely we could make that happen by narrowing and shortening the cars, partly for giving more space on the racetrack, but partly for the aerodynamic effect that these currently massive cars have. So that's, I hope, answers that question, is that yes, I do believe that narrower Formula One cars could help aid overtaking, as well as a number of other issues. That's not the sole silver bullet, let's make that clear, but they would make a difference. Let's see what some of you guys are saying. Neil Roberts says, get Chain Bear on as co-host next week. I do think this could work, and I'd quite like to try some of this, so I might start bringing a few people in as we go, but I thought, given that it's the first time and it's an experiment, you know, I'd love to give you guys the opportunity to sort of, I don't know, give something back to you for being so loyal to me, particularly over the first few weeks of technical disasters. AMPM says, can't wait for those 18-inch wheels. Yeah, I mean, that's perhaps another subject altogether, but it doesn't really mean that the 18-inch wheels don't really have an impact on the width or the length of the car, because that could all be shrunk down and still keep the low-profile 18-inch rims. Wayne says, is losing downforce a bad thing? I don't think so. Work on increasing mechanical grip, not downforce. I mean, Wayne, I agree with you there. I think if we can get the cars to grip mechanically, we solve a number of issues. First of all, we can make them smaller. Secondly, we start to minimise the wake that's coming off the back of the car because of all the tricky aerodynamics. And of course, the 2022 cars are very much designed to try and minimise that turbulent wake coming off the back anyway. So I hope we'll see a massive improvement in that sense before too long anyway. What's the width and length difference between the current cars and the 2022 reg cars? Okay, XAM with that one. That's a really good question. I actually looked into this. My goodness, what a nightmare. When I started to open up the 2022 regulations, they've changed the way they do that now. They've written it all down. So instead of having a very simple set of dimensions, which you could clearly see on all the old regulations, they now have done it in terms of regulatory boxes that the engineers work from, and it's all designed to fit neatly into a CAD system. So the upshot of that is it's really hard to find a set of dimensions that you need in the technical regs. However, I have gleaned from what I've managed to find in there that what they have specified, so the width is the same, 2 meters will be the same in 2022. The length, currently there's no maximum length to a Formula One car in the regulations. The length in the 2022 cars is now going to be defined in that there's an overall length of wheelbase, so axle centerline to axle centerline. That is now specified, which isn't today. It doesn't give you the overall length of the car because the bits that overhang that will still be free to make the car a little bit longer or shorter than some others. There will be some variation in that sense. But the wheelbase of the excuse me, the wheelbase of the car is going to be set and restricted to a maximum dimension in 2022. But that dimension, and again it's quite hard to compare to today because we don't have that figure specifically, but I think it's going to be very, very similar to about the average car today. I think the 2022 car will be a tiny bit shorter in terms of wheelbase than the current Mercedes, but probably right in line with some of the other cars on the grid. That's how I see it, although I'm happy to be proved wrong in that because it took an absolute day and a half of work to try and come up with those those figures. Let's see. Can refuelling help in lightening the car, says Vikram Aditya. So refuelling obviously does lighten the load of the fuel on board the car at any given time in the race, typically. So it would have that effect immediately like that. That's a quick way to do it. But also the knock-on effects of refuelling, and this is something that's massively up for debate, I don't think is the right solution. I don't think refuelling adds to the show of Formula One. In fact, I think it detracts from the show because in fact, almost all of the overtaking happens in the pit lane. There is no point in a team taking a risk out on the racetrack because all they have to do is stagger their pit stops to the opposing cars that they're fighting, and they can make the overtake with an undercut in the race or with an overcut with different fuel loads at different times and different tyres. So it moves the racing from the track into the pit lane, which for me is not where we should be heading in Formula One. Hopefully the 2022 cars will address some of that being able to fight on track, and we won't need to worry as much as we're perhaps discussing this today. If they were smaller, they'll be lighter, says Rob, says Will Bennett. Yes, absolutely, they would be to some extent, although the bulk of the weight does come from, of course, the stretching out of a Formula One car. And the reason, as I've just described, is that you can stretch out the packaging of your power unit and things like that into a nice aerodynamic shape. So you still have to have all of the things under the bodywork in a shorter car. We're not going to get rid of the hybrid system, the batteries and all those kind of things. We're just going to cram it into a different shaped area. So you would lose some weight, of course, with the bodywork and the floor and those things, but they're minimal in comparison to some of the other components that would have to remain. Do you think boosting the output from the battery would be a way to improve overtaking, says Laz? I mean, yes, it would. Of course it would, because it would give a boost. And if that was deployable by a driver, like a boost button, if you like, by a driver at different times, they could use it to overtake or defend from an overtake. So yes, it would. But there are a lot of complications that come with boosting up the battery packs. We are pretty advanced in terms of the energy stores in Formula One cars right now. Personally, it's an area that I would love to see explored a little bit more in terms of development. I'd like to see the restrictions that we currently have in that area be relaxed a bit, particularly under the fact that we've now got a cost cap in place to restrict spending. So let's see that area, whereas battery technology is an area where the wider world is screaming out for somebody to have that light bulb moment and come up with a technology that just is better than everything else that we've got, that's holding back everything from electric cars to your mobile phone to everything is restricted to some extent by what the capacity or the energy density of that battery. If we could open up Formula One's development in the energy store area, it could really be a massive area where we could lead the world in terms of developing a technology. So yes is the answer. Yes, if we could get more out of the batteries and give it to the driver deployable during a race, yes, of course, that could be an overtake opportunity, but it's a little bit like a DRS type solution, isn't it? So those kind of things are they're often kind of controversial in terms of whether we want them or not. Right, let me see. Will F1 ever get rid of DRS, says Jacob Hornbrook. And yes, I think is the answer to that. I think it will. I think 2022 again is this time, everyone's got hopes pinned on 2022 with the new aerodynamic format of Formula One cars, that we don't necessarily need DRS in the same way we need it now. What they're going to do in 2022 is keep DRS for season 1, or certainly to start the season, but they've got the understanding that that could be modified or could be changed or could even be taken away at some point during a season, or certainly for the second season, if we decide we no longer need it to improve the spectacle of the race. So yes, DRS is not something that anyone hopes to see around forever in Formula One necessarily, and hopefully 2022 could be a bit of a turning point, but until we get cars on a track and see the actual real life performance of those, we just don't know. Right, shall we move on to another question? Let me get rid of that one and bear with me while I swap these questions over. Mathis Martin has this one. Mathis, it would be wrong when one of the wheels loses grip under braking or acceleration. Oops, hang on. And it can't, I can't imagine that GPS would be precise enough. Am I wrong, or is it something else? So your theory in what you're saying is absolutely right, but the way that Formula One cars measure their speed is through a wheel speed sensor, or a number of wheel speed sensors. They tend to be Hall effect sensors, so contactless. So a little sensor in the upright that measures a sort of spinning toothed wheel that's on the upright itself, spinning round, and as each one of the teeth pass the Hall effect sensor, it changes the magnetic field that's bouncing back off into that sensor, and that's how it picks up, and it's obviously calibrated. That's how it measures the speed. So it has one of those on every corner of the car. Yes, of course, when it comes to things like wheel spin at the rear end of the car, the wheel will be travelling at different speeds to the car physically, but that's why we've got sensors on each wheel. And we also have things like slip sensors, GPS, we have pitot tubes for airspeed. So there's a lot of things that we can correlate to know what the actual speed of the car is. And the reality is that, yes, we get wheel spin at the rear end, but obviously we know that, we can see that from a lot of other sensors on the car too. The front wheels, while the rear wheels are spinning, would still be turning at the regular speed. So that will give us a true picture of wheel speed. If we were to lock up a front wheel speed or a front wheel under braking, of course, we can easily see that. We still have other measures on board the car to tell us what the wheel speed is. So that is how we do it. That's the technical way to do it. And within the data set, we have a number of ways to use various types of sensor and various bits of information coming in to make sure that we always have an accurate picture of the car speed and the wheel speed all the way around the lap. So I think hopefully that one answers that one. Just like a bike speedo, says G Thompson. Yes, very similar. And actually most automotive applications use these kind of Hall effect contactless sensors. First of all, because they're really easy to install, they work, they're very reliable. Particularly on an F1 car, it's obviously an incredibly harsh environment. You think about the temperatures that are going on down there in the centre of the upright where the wheel speeds are situated. Incredible temperatures, brake dust everywhere, vibrations. It has to really live in a harsh environment, and they're so reliable that that's exactly why sensors like that are used both on F1 cars and in a multitude of applications that are a little bit like that. And yeah, big speedos are exactly the same. Let me see what else we've got. Varun Sambi says, can all-wheel drive make an F1 comeback? I'd love to see that. I would love to see a kind of a four-wheel drive system where we can start recovering energy off the front axle as well as the rear. I think Formula E are looking to go to that in their next generation of car. It feels like if you're looking at hybrid or a fully electric road cars, of course they're all going to be doing that, if not having one in each wheel. So Formula One's a bit behind in terms of its hybrid system now, because the rest of the world has moved on since we introduced this quite dramatically. So yeah, I'd love to see us start looking at either torque vectoring from all four corners. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? Where we can manipulate the power or the torque from each one of the hub motors, which we could have, where they could recover energy in each corner, but also deploy it independently in each corner. That would be amazing. But also, yeah, front axle system would be fantastic too. So I can definitely see a time where Formula One moves towards that, but it needs the buy-in of all of the engine manufacturers, the power unit manufacturers. And that's something that's incredibly hard to find right now, because they've all got their own agendas. No one's quite sure whether to go fully electric, whether to start looking into hydrogen, or whether they should be really still exploring the combustion engine for many more years to come. So we've got a bit of a mash-up at the moment in terms of Formula One power unit suppliers and where they think the future of their industry lies. All right, let's move on to, hang on, Stephen Burnett. All-wheel drive with electric motors for the front wheels, regen braking straight to the wheels, reduce battery size to force battery development. Yes, Stephen, that's exactly, excuse me, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That would be awesome. I'd love to see that. Right, let me get the next question up. And this one comes from Helga Kuistra. Excuse me. Helga Kuistra says, will Ferrari deliberately perform badly this and next season to gain extra development time for 2022 with the new restrictions and wind tunnel time, etc.? Now, I responded rather cheekily to Helga on Twitter by just saying, I don't think they'll do it deliberately. But let's be fairer to Ferrari. Ferrari are not going to do that on purpose, partly because they are, you could say they are the closest, if not one of the closest, to Mercedes in terms of toppling them and taking victories and maybe even a championship at some point. So you would say that a team like that is highly unlikely to want to throw away deliberately a championship. But it does open up the question of, if you look further down the field, further down the grid, could something like this happen when a team is perhaps in a season that's definitely not going their way, that maybe they, in their own minds, might have written off to some extent? Perhaps they know they can no longer fight for, you know, some significant, they're no longer in a significant challenge during the season. Could they start to potentially look at the year after? And what of course Helga's talking about is this new rule where we're restricting the aerodynamic research that a team is allowed to have over the course of a season, depending on their previous year's results in the championship. So effectively you get more wind tunnel and CFD time the further down the field you came the year before. Now, of course, you've got to remember that championship positions equate to prize money. So it's unlikely that most teams would be willing to give up prize money one year in the potential hope that a bit of extra aero resource the following year might enable them to earn more, because there's so many variables that can affect your championship. There's certainly no guarantees, even with extra wind tunnel, that you would finish further than you are that year. But it is an interesting side to all of this, a little bit like when we were talking about reverse grids and could people start to throw a reverse grid qualifying race, for example, for a better grid position, the following day. I don't think it'll end up like that, because I think there's too much at stake in any given Grand Prix for somebody to start throwing away results like that. But it does open up an interesting can of worms, I think. Let's see. Josh Smith, they tend to do a good job at mucking their own season up already. I don't want to be harsh on Ferrari because, look, Ferrari are an incredible team, and the reason I say that, yes, they've made mistakes, and yes, it's very easy to poke fun at Ferrari at times because of the way they operate, but they're also operating at an incredibly high level, and any mistakes or failings as we might see them in any season or any given race are down to tiny little details. If you look at the rest of what Ferrari do, they do it incredibly well. I mean, just look, yes, they've got a load of money, but look where they are. Second best, generally, in terms of Formula One, behind the mighty Mercedes. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because they've got an incredible set of people, an incredible set of resources, and you know, they are a great race team. So I don't like to poke fun at them too much. Let me see. I'm going to move on to the next question here, which comes from Freddie Junker, who says, did Ferrari use a filming day for their drive around Maranello in the SF1000? I've seen people say they can't get any data from driving slowly around public roads anyway, and thus don't need a filming day, but surely they could get at least some data this way. Hold on, why's my computer not charging? Bear with me. There we go. So the answer is that Ferrari actually didn't use a filming day, as far as I know. I think they used what they call one of their demonstration days. So a team gets 2 demo days a year, which can be used at a location other than an F1 track. And I think it's restricted to something like 15 kilometres. So it's a really short run. You have to get permission to do that, and often the FIA will send a representative to that event, knowing you're going to be there to make sure that no rules are broken. I think that's what Ferrari used. In terms of what data could they acquire from that, absolutely, you can get data from any time a Formula One car runs, anywhere. I mean, 100% you can, because it could be just silly things like putting on a set of brake ducts and making sure that they don't rub, or they don't foul any of the suspension, or foul the tyre, or as you're going through lock or over bumps. I mean, things that you find it very difficult to do just sat on a set of stands in your factory. You know, you can have sensors on the car that you can just put through their paces, things like the wheel speed sensors that I just talked about. You know, you can run those on a rig, you can test them in the factory on a bench, you can do all those things to make sure they're working, but there's nothing like actually putting them onto a Formula One car in that harsh environment that I was talking about and see what happens. So they can get all of that stuff. They can run new modes of engine modes, they can run new components in gearboxes and things like that, and it's about putting some mileage, and I know it's not much mileage, but it's about getting the thing in its dynamic form, rolling down the road, going over the lumps and bumps of a road or a racetrack. Those things are valuable things that are so difficult to do in modern Formula One because track testing is so limited now. So yes, they can absolutely get some data from running a car, even if it's an older car, or even if it's just at 15 kilometres between the factory and the racetrack. Data learned was how to work with masks on, says Rob Graham. And that's another good point. Anything like this, and this is why all the teams are trying to do filming days and demo days, because as well as whatever you can learn from the car, there are so many new procedures. And it might not sound much like putting a mask on or trying to maintain some sort of social distancing protocols, but it does affect what you do. Formula One teams are so well drilled into what they do. It's, you know, you practice it so much that it becomes habit. And that's deliberate. It becomes habit because that's when it's habit, it becomes less chance for mistakes to happen. Everybody knows 100% what they got to do. They know what the guy next to them has to do and when he's going to do it. And the whole thing works like clockwork because it's been done over and over and over again. Well, now we're about to go and do some things differently. And they may not be hugely significant, but they are going to be different. And that is going to have an impact. So getting the team together or the crew together, even if just for a little track demo or a filming day, is a really valuable opportunity to just try out how that's going to work. How's it going to work around the car? How's it going to work in the garage? Can you do all the tasks or the jobs that you used to do without even thinking? Can you still do them as effectively or as quickly do some jobs now take longer? And the answer to that is 100% yes, some jobs will now take longer because there are new restrictions or protocols in place. So these things are very valuable, absolutely. Which teams will test in Austria in the coming weeks? Jean Videz. So who's been there? Renault have been out in Austria, haven't they, recently? I'm not sure if, have Red Bull been out? Have I missed that? Have Red Bull been out in Austria? You'd say they must surely be. But I must admit, I don't think I've seen that. Or maybe I've just forgotten it. But you certainly say that Red Bull should or would take that opportunity. Others have used other racetracks. So a filming day around Austria doesn't necessarily give you a massive advantage at that track because, of course, yes, it might give you something, but the reality is it's more about procedures, protocols, any new bits on the car that you might want to shake down in those occasions rather than any possible performance running that you might get at the track. So Mercedes went to Silverstone, didn't they? There'll be, as long as you can run a car somewhere, it'll be a big advantage. It doesn't necessarily have to be Austria in the build up to the race. Let me see. Hold on. Red Bull are going to Silverstone, says Finlay Austin. There you go. So that's my point exactly. They're going to Silverstone because it's literally around the corner from their Milton Keynes factory, and there isn't necessarily an advantage in taking everything to Austria, bringing it back where they'll lose a couple of days. If they can pop up to Silverstone for the afternoon and then pop back again, it's probably more productive for them to do it that way. So there you go, that's the answer to that one. Silverstone for most people, although I'm pretty sure Renault did go to the Red Bull Ring. Let's see, a bit of a discussion about 2008 going on here, and Chris A says, does Marc think Kubica could have won that year's World Drivers' Championship had BMW continued development on their 2006 car? I definitely think he'd have been in with a shout. He was an incredible driver. He had a great car, and even he says that was one of the things that held him back that year, was BMW deciding to end development on the car. I'd have loved to have seen Kubica get a proper shot throughout an entire season, because I genuinely think he was when someone like Fernando Alonso talks about a driver like Kubica and says he's one of the best, people in the paddock, engineers who worked with him said he was one of the best. Those are the references that you take notice of, particularly people who've worked with him. An engineer who works with a driver like that, having a good reference is where I always go for an understanding of what another driver might be like, because the relationship's so close and so intense that they know everything about that person. And Kubica got some very, very glowing reports from the people that worked most closely with him. So yes, he could well have had a shot at the championship. Given that it was 2008, I'm kind of glad he didn't. Let me see. Racing Point looking at only one update this year. Could they be a race winner this year, says Darren Baker. Yes, in answer to that, they could be a race winner. Now we've only got pre-season testing to go off, but look, what's going to happen here when we get to Austria, the first couple of races in Austria, and then we of course move on to Budapest, don't we? Those races are going to be slightly different. They're going to be like a pre-season again, where opportunity can arise for someone who's there ready to take it. Now, the Racing Point was probably one of the top 3 quickest cars in the pre-season tests. Maybe quicker than a Ferrari, up there with Mercedes and Red Bull, in that ballpark. Well, if you're in that mix, anything can happen in these first few races, and if Racing Point can maintain reliability and can maintain the things they've done well over the years, which is get everything right and be there to pick up the pieces if other people fail, if they can do that now with a car that's properly up there anyway, there's absolutely every chance they could win a Grand Prix in 2020. Yes, they haven't got the endless money that the big teams still have got. And what Racing Point might struggle with is development over time. They will have less capability to develop the car, although of course there is huge restriction on lots of areas of that anyway this year, but I think they might end up getting left behind. Given that these cars will carry over, the big teams will start to ramp up aero development as the season continues. Racing Point could potentially get left behind in that race, but we'll have to wait and see. But yes, 100% they have a good chance at winning a Grand Prix in 2020. Mercedes sound like the only team to be bringing upgrades on the first race. Crazy, says Michael Bielacour. Yeah, Mercedes have already said they are bringing considerable upgrades, but I don't think they'll be the only ones. I think there will be others. It's been very difficult to bring upgrades because of the restrictions and the shutdown in factories. So we've had an extended shutdown where nobody was allowed into the factories. It's like the summer shutdown, but they brought it forward and it was much longer. That means no work on the cars was allowed. And teams do adhere to that. I mean, lots of people say, well, weren't they all just designing stuff at home? No, you know, they are not allowed to even log into their email during that period of time. And I know you can set up a Gmail account and do things that way. I know there's always ways around this, but the consequences to breaking these rules, as I've said before, are really very serious. So teams take them seriously. So in that regard then, no development's been happening. However, the cars that went to Australia, the development building up to that, of course, was fixed a long way before Australia. The Australia car had to be decided upon probably a month or two before that to push the button on production, which means that in that period of time, right up to Australia, there was still a lot of development in terms of design going on. So what they will have been able to do on some of those elements, not the ones that have a huge lead time, but some elements, will have been able to know they've made gains in a wind tunnel since they committed to the Australia car, have developed those components, and now, having come back to the operation in the factories, be able to push the button on production on some of those. And that's what Mercedes have done. They will be able to bring new components because there had been a significant development period between signing off the Australia car and actually getting to Australia with that car. I hope that makes some sense to you. Let me see. Do you think Andy Cowie leaving Mercedes will affect this season, says Adam Elliott. Well, he's not leaving Mercedes fully, is he, this season? It will have an impact, of course it will, because he's a really significant key player, but he is staying around as a consultant, I believe, for some period of time. So there's going to be a really smooth handover to the next guy. He'll be training him up, he'll be handing over his way of doing things. So the effect of Andy Cowie leaving will actually be felt much more next year and perhaps the year beyond that. But he will have an impact. But Mercedes have lost really great key people in the past and have dealt with it very well. I think I said this last week. They have a great structure in place there, which means they've got strength in depth, if you like. So they've got people ready to step up. And that's the sign of a really strong, great team or a great business, is that if you lose somebody, the whole thing doesn't come collapsing down. And that's what Mercedes have got in great abundance. Ray Davison, off topic, but sad to hear about Zanardi's recent accident. The guy's been through so much. Yeah, we should mention that. So sad. That guy is such an inspiration. You may have seen this. I spent a weekend with him a couple of years ago for Sky Sports on his 50th birthday, where I went down to Mugello to hang out with him for a weekend, and it was a weekend that genuinely changed my life. And I say that because he was such an inspirational character. And if I'm ever struggling with anything or I've got a massive challenge ahead of me, I promise you, I genuinely always think back to the way that Alex described overcoming his accident and finding a way back to get racing again. Because that's what he loved, that's what his passion was. And he didn't spend long feeling sorry for himself. He turned that challenge around into, okay, how can I now go racing again without my legs? And I always refer back to those moments, and I think that guy's inspired so many people. He's changed the way I think about challenges like that in my own life, and he must have done it for so many people. He's been through so much, and now to have this, it's hugely unfair, of course. I wish him and everybody around him the very best of luck with his recovery. But look, if anybody can fight these things, it will be him. He's a fighter, we know that for sure. So yeah, big love to Alex and Andy and family. What a hero. Okay. Yeah, lots of people wishing well to Alex as well, absolutely. Okay, let's pick another question as it's, what, 9:45. Let's get another one in. Let's see what we got here. Dan Dragoy says, whatever happened to the winner? Any insight into this? That's exactly what it does. It obscures the sponsors' logos on the overalls. And I did a bit of digging into this. I think I'm right in saying the last time this happened, the last time a driver received, in an F1 Grand Prix, received the laurel for winning was 1986. And that was kind of coinciding with a time when commercialisation of the sport was starting to really ramp up, and one or two prominent sponsors thought that that shot, which is the money shot, isn't it, where the driver's on the podium, laurel around his neck, bottle of champagne, it's on the back page of every newspaper, that's the shot. And in those shots, in many of them, a number of those sponsors were obscured. And that wasn't, you know, that didn't fit with the amount of money they were all paying back then to have their logos on there. And so there was a request put in to deal with it. And I guess Bernie, as he does, saw the commercial side as perhaps one of the most important, if not the most important, and those laurel wreaths disappeared. So 1986, I believe, was the last time they were there. Of course, the Pirelli caps that you do see today do still have a kind of gold laurel on there. So the tradition, I guess, is just a little nod to tradition in those Pirelli hats. But yeah, the laurels have gone. All right, let me see. See if I've got any more. I have. Jackie Twix says this. With all the teams and personnel, etc., having to travel together within the bubble, do teams still have to pay for their own travel costs, or are Liberty paying for it all? If Liberty are paying for it, will the travel costs be deducted from the team's prize money at the end of the year? Also, do any reserve personnel have to travel within the bubble from day one? For example, if you have 3 mechanics go sick halfway through the season, can you fly another three in? Or do they need to have already been your 3 reserves travelling with you? Wow, that was a long one. So the teams are all contributing to the travel costs, so that is how it always works, and it's the same this year. The teams will, as part of their budget, will have to fork out for travel, even though it's been much more centralised. I don't know the exact split. I don't know how they're splitting it. I don't know that side of things, but yes, they do have to come up with the costs for some of that. In terms of the reserves, that's quite a good point, but the answer to that is that no, you don't have to have your reserves, whether it's mechanics, drivers, anybody else, travelling around in the bubble from day one. What you do have to do is, if you need to call on a reserve, you have to have a reserve ready that's able to take a test, and obviously they can't enter the bubble unless they test clear of the virus. So that's the way they're going to do it. There will be reserves on standby in factories and all around the world, ready to kick in if needed. And this becomes more of a challenge if the season does end up going further afield to the longer haul races. Maybe on those occasions teams would consider taking reserves with them because of the logistics of getting them there in a hurry. But the answer is that those people, whether it's mechanics or engineers or whoever, will have to be ready, as in be trained up and be prepared in every sense of the word. And then they have to take a test, get a clear result, and then they can come in and enter the bubble, where they'll then be tested every 2 days along with everybody else, all the whilst they're moving around inside that bubble. That's the way that this whole thing is planned to work, and we will have to see exactly what happens with all of that as it unfolds, because there's still a lot of unknowns about all of this as to how it'll work, will it work, if there's a significant outbreak within the bubble, how does that impact things? We know a small outbreak in a team, they plan not to cancel a race at this stage. It will be up to a team to bring in their stand-ins, and if a team, for whatever reason, a significant outbreak, for example, can no longer compete in the race is still planned to go ahead. that's the way they're talking right now. So still a lot of uncertainty, still working out a lot of the details of it, even at this late stage. But one way or another, we are going racing again soon. And I can tell you from my trip to Germany this week just gone, it worked fine. And I was doing it commercial. I was doing it on a commercial airline. I was doing it in taxis and all those kind of things. It worked fine. You know, the system works if you are sensible and all the rest of it. And Formula One are putting the most meticulous F1-like preparation into all of this. So I have confidence that they will be able to pull this off and we'll get some racing back very, very soon, which I cannot wait for, and I know you can't either. So listen, thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to leave it there tonight, but remember, I want to try and bring one of you in next week. I think I'm going to start with just one. There might be possible to bring more than one in, but I'm not exactly sure how that works yet. That might be pushing things a little bit too far. But keep an eye on my socials. I'll tell you how I think I might be able to work that out or choose somebody. And if you want to be on this show next week, hosting with me, helping to ask questions, I mean, not sat here, but through the lens, it could be you. Keep an eye out. I'll let you know how we do it. For now, though, I'll be back this week with some stuff which I haven't planned yet, but I'm sure it'll be interesting in some way or another. And I hope to see you all back here next week with somebody alongside me. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you very, very soon. Ta-da!